Pat Flynn is the nicest fucking person you'll ever meet on the internet. This is a guy that went to Berkeley with me. He was an architect, ended up getting fired, and has created an empire of just being a great person online and helping a shit ton of people. He doesn't swear at all. In this video, we actually go over how the hell did Pat get started? How did he go from an architect, lost his job, to actually creating a huge company around his podcast, around his website, around his email list? What would Pat do if he had to start a business today? And just a bunch of other failures that Pat has had along his journey. If you love this video, make sure you hit that like button and hit subscribe to make sure you never miss another video in your inbox.
Welcome.
Everyone knows Pat Flynn, nicest guy on the internet.
So this is the foyer or the waiting room, although that makes it sound like it's like a hospital or something. And we have a mural there that was painted by a fan of mine and some thank you notes and such too. But it's just a nice kind of welcoming entry into the space before, work starts to happen. In this room here, we call it the green room because in film and in theater, the green room is the room where the actors hang out before they get to work, right? So this is the kind of pre-work area before we shoot videos and stuff. So there's a conference table here and a lot of things about me and things that I love. That's just tacos.
Pat Flynn did. He knew I was coming, he put this out.
So let's go into the studio. So this is a studio. We got this space specifically to shoot videos, both recorded and live videos. So we have multiple cameras in here, multiple sets, and just a lot of fun things are gonna happen in here.
This is wild.
This is pro. I wanted a full setup that I can go to where I can just walk in and press record. My YouTube channel started in 2009. How I started in YouTube was doing screen flow videos, so screen recordings, because I was just so afraid of putting myself on camera. But I had a lot of stuff to teach, so I just started by, recording what was on my computer and teaching people how to use different things like Facebook and all these other things I was doing.
So one thing I was curious about, someone messaged me 2 days ago and they're like, I want to build my personal brand and I want to build a blog. So what's your thought when someone comes and says that to you?
My follow-up question is always, well, why? And it's really interesting, the answers you get. And a lot of times people pause and you can tell that they haven't fully thought things through. They just want to build a personal brand, most likely because that's what everybody else is doing, right? Like Noah Kagan and Amy Porterfield and Pat Flynn, and we all have our own brands now, which I think is great. I think it's smart to want to do that because nobody's like you, and this is something that you can use and utilize no matter what it is that you do in the future. But at the same time, that's very you-focused when somebody's asking that question. Very me. So what is this personal brand going to be about? What is your personal brand? If somebody is talking to somebody else about you and your personal brand, what are they going to say about you? Or are they even going to talk about you at all? Why would they? And you need to know how to answer that question even before building your personal brand. So what do you want your personal brand to be about? What 3 words would describe that personal brand? And how would that potentially convince somebody to either want to work with you or hire you or buy your products or whatever?
Well, for you, when you were starting out, were you making money right away after you got let go?
No. I was building up my credibility in the space of teaching people how to pass this architectural exam. The way that I was doing that, there weren't Facebook groups then, but I was in a forum, being the guy that everybody would go to because I had all the answers. And I would just not ask for anything because I didn't have anything to sell, but I became known as the guy that had answers to people's questions related to this exam. And eventually what happened was people just naturally continued to ask me for more. And then so I just created a study guide and then sold it, and it became very easy. And I didn't know how to sell, but the fact that I had a button that people can click on was enough for people to pay me money to get access to even more content that could help them to pass something that was very difficult in a much shorter period of time and without stress. I got to a point where anybody who just was new in there would eventually hear my name even if I wasn't there because people would talk about me. There's an essay that was written way back in the day. You probably know 1,000 True Fans.
Yeah.
By Kevin Kelly, right? It says if you get 1,000 fans who are just absolutely in love with what you do, I mean, these are the kinds of people who, if you're a musician, they would drive 8 hours to see you. If you're an entrepreneur, they're going to buy everything that you come out with, right? If you had 1,000 people who paid you $100 a year for something, I mean, some of us pay more than that per month for stuff we don't even use, right? $100 a year, 1,000 people, that's a 6-figure income right there, right? And it's great in theory, but then when you think about it, really, it's like, okay, let me build 1 fan a day for less than 3 years, and it'll happen. So maybe instead of trying to, build something that's going to be a blockbuster hit, why don't you just change somebody's life today in some way and build that fan 1 day at a time? And it doesn't take very long to build a fan. It just takes a little bit of care and attention and a little bit of effort.
how did you know when you finally started becoming a brand or becoming more known? And what do you think you got known for? Because I think that's something that others can learn from if they want to get their company known or themselves.
Yeah. It hit me when I started to get asked to get on other people's podcasts, really. And I never asked. I never asked to be on other people's shows. But when people started to ask me if I had time to get on their podcast, I mean, that was really a good sign to me that, wow, like, and before podcasting, it was, being featured on their blog or being, getting links back to my website that I would notice from people I never knew. That was a good sign to me that, wow, I have stuff actually worth mentioning. So when I asked, it was like, oh, well, I just love the fact that you have these income reports and that you're very transparent. You don't hold anything back. You talk about your failures as much as you talk about your wins. And I was like, that's great. Also, what I noticed was a lot of people would mention the fact that they loved how I talked about my family a bit, which was different than all these other people who were showing off their Ferraris and mansions, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was the family guy.
How did you persist? So you started making your site, Smart Passive Income.
I mean, I had to. My wife, now wife, back then fiance, she didn't sign up for any of this stuff to happen. So what was I going to do? Just kind of give up and try to start over and leave her behind, or like really try to man up and actually start to make things work? And that's part of the reason why I started Smart Passive Income, because I didn't want people to have to go through such a dramatic change in their life to see what was available to them. When I got laid off, my initial goal was just to survive, right? And then I got to that point where I could see that I would survive. And then I was like, okay, well, what's next? The thing in my head that has me asking what's next is the fact that I know that there's so much more I could do. And I think now that I've had kids, the baby effect definitely took place in 2009 when my son was born. I knew that when he was born that I had to always keep going bigger because of my legacy and the kinds of things I want to leave him with in terms of who I am. I started reading all these biographies like Benjamin Franklin, Steve Jobs. I just picked up Leonardo da Vinci. But in each of these biographies, I've always thought, well, what's my biography going to look like? Is it even going to be worth buying or reading? Or do I want to just die one day and just kind of be forgotten? Or can I still continue to help people even after I pass? For me, something that's really important is now, again, inspired by the kids, I have 2 kids now, is education. So my kids are really lucky. We got them into a school that is a STEM school, so science, technology, engineering, and math, and they teach project-based learning. So it's very entrepreneurial in the way they teach. And I've seen a dramatic effect on how the way that they're being taught in this particular school is having on who they are becoming as a person. For example, the way they are tackling problems, the way they are dealing with struggles, the way that they think about the world is so different. My goal now for the next 10 years is to see how I might be able to actually make an impact in having entrepreneurial type curriculum in public schools, in all schools. And I'm already getting involved in some of the things related to education here in San Diego and getting connected with a lot of people in groups, building relationships. I'm also an advisor for Pencils of Promise, which is helping to build schools all around the world.
Well, I also think you're thinking bigger.
And thinking
right?
bigger,
and it's like
right?
You're like thinking of larger things and you're like, well, I'm going to go and try to do something.
Well, it's like, I can do it. There's nothing I know that can stop me now. It's very common to just think, oh, well, why should you do that? Or can you even do that? Or, you're likely going to fail. Now I use those kinds of thoughts as a sign that, well, this is something I need to try and do. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, great. At least I tried, right? I have this saying, I'd much rather live a life full of oh wells than a life full of what ifs.
Any ones come to mind about that? The oh wells?
Some software type stuff that I've been doing. I tried to create a physical product that kind of fell flat a little bit.
Which was that one?
It was a journal and a calendar. A lot of people are doing these journals, and I try to add a calendar component on top of it. We beta tested it. We tried it. We had 21 people actually receive a prototype copy of it. So I was actually taking action on it, and it didn't get the results that I wanted it to. So
what were the results?
I mean, it worked for some people, but just the excitement levels died out.
So how did you decide that product to stop but other things to continue?
A lot of times it's just based on some of the initial results you're getting, like it was with this one. Sometimes it's just a gut feeling.
I think what I've noticed in our business is there's times where I'm pushing really hard. Sometimes it feels like you're pushing the rock up the hill, and there's other times where you're pushing the rock down the hill.
Right.
And it's just rolling.
Yeah.
And I think, so like your journal was uphill. What was the downhill one for you?
The downhill one were these online courses that I've come out with recently.
Okay.
They're just kind of selling like hotcakes because just people are looking for the solutions. And what's really exciting is there are solutions similar to the ones that I'm creating, but it's great confirmation that people want to learn from me, right? So it's inspired me to do more courses. Actually, we came out with 4 in 2017.
I'm talking about courses, but taking a step back, for the people that are watching, I want to do a challenge.
Okay.
So you're a viewer, just like, and a lot of the viewers out there, I think they watch your stuff, my stuff, other people's stuff for aspirational. If someone is starting out, you have $1,000 in 1 year to create your side hustle or your side business. You don't have a name. You have no brand. How would you start thinking about that to do, let's say to make like $10,000 a month?
First of all, spend time thinking about what kinds of things could I potentially offer others? What skills do I have that others may be able to hire me for? If I started today, but I do have my brand knowledge and
everything you've learned, but no one knows you.
I would find and try to see if I could have just one small business hire me to see how I might be able to help with their branding and their message online.
All right, so how would you find them? I think this is the part I'm curious.
Yeah, I would literally call them and just search in Google and call them, or walk up to them if they're maybe just whatever small business I might be interested in. Like, that's the cool thing when you're just starting out, you get to choose which path you want to go, which might be sports related or something related to parenting or something, I don't know, something related to something I'm interested in, right? And I go and I just have a conversation.
Would you just call them or email? How would you find them?
I would call them, because who's calling anybody these days?
No.
Nobody. So people are going to pay attention to you now. Before, it was like when people call, they don't pay attention. But small businesses, they pick up the phone. So I'd call, I'd have conversations, and I'd just ask them questions like, what are the kinds of things that you are doing that you wish could be done better? What is a tool that you have that is kind of working halfway for you? How might there be a tool that could be used better? Or how might that tool become better? And then seeing how I might be able to use either my skills or potentially create a software. I mean, $1,000 is not a lot of money, but it's also a good number to potentially test things out with.
Part of the challenge, though, is you have no audience. Who would you free
You
sell
don't.
to?
That's why you're talking to people individually, and then you just call them. I wanted to talk about a little thought experiment that I always run with people who pitch me their business ideas, and it gets to this point of like, oh well, like, why are you special? And the thought experiment is like, if you take your idea and you pitch it on the Shark Tank, right? So you don't have the product yet, but it's your idea, and you pitch it on the Shark Tank. They're going to ask you a lot of questions, but the one question I want you to know how to answer is from Mr. Wonderful in the middle. He does this with his fingers, right? And he goes, well, what's stopping me from hiring a bunch of people to do exactly what you're talking about?
Ooh.
Why should I work with you? And you have to be able to answer that question. Like, what is it about you that is worth investing in versus just, well, why couldn't somebody else just do that?
So as you started your podcast and you started documenting the book that you put out there, how do you think you started getting known for that? Like, how did you get more attention? Was it consistency from doing it for so long?
I mean, it was consistency. It was also, really trying to add value to the relationships that I was building. So a lot of the people who came on the show, I wanted to see what I can do to help them out. And, that made them want to promote the show even more. Really, relationships have become a really important thing. So I think, the reason why people call me the nice guy is because I do try to go out of my way to do things for people that most people wouldn't.
Have you ever gotten taken advantage of anything? Because you are nice?
Yeah. Being taken advantage of, not in a terrible way where, I'm losing money or something terrible has happened as a result, but just, taking my time away from things that I probably should be spending my time on because I just want to say yes and help as many people out as possible. I've been learning to say no a lot more. I think that's a big struggle that a lot of entrepreneurs have because we want to take every opportunity that comes our way.
Yeah.
But I think now that I've grown and become more of a CEO type person versus a scrappy entrepreneur, I've gotten a little bit smarter about when to say yes and when to say no.
And what do you think you're doing differently now as a CEO versus a scrappy entrepreneur? What have you stopped doing?
I stopped, like I said earlier, saying yes to everything. I've paid a lot more attention to where money is being spent and how it's being spent, and a lot of the analytics and the ROI that's coming from that. I'm also planning more. I think that's the other thing. When I was a scrappy entrepreneur, I was writing blog posts the same week they were being published. I was recording podcast episodes the same week that they were being published. Now I'm thinking 3 months ahead of time, and I'm also integrating these courses on top of the content calendar to understand, okay, well, how can we set people up? How can we seed these courses in people's brains before they come out to allow just the whole brand in of itself kind of be more event-like in these launches versus just I'll put something together now, right? So there's a lot more planning involved. That I think has been the biggest difference.
With the courses and your podcast and everything you've put out, what's your favorite story? Or what's one of the ones more recently and I would like to end with that, of someone that you've been able to help?
A very interesting thing happened when I was in London speaking. I got to meet this person for the first time after back and forth email conversations for 5 years. And this guy's from Poland. His name is Michał. Actually, I was introduced to him in 2012 when he sent me this email about how I saved his life. And I was like, I don't understand how I saved your life. And he's like, it's because of your podcast. And then he wrote this whole thing for me that was basically this story about how he injured himself. He used to do a lot of extreme snowboarding, and he crushed both of his ankles, was completely bedridden, unable to work, unable to support his family, was completely depressed. And on that bed he was sitting on, he discovered my podcast, and he started listening to the show and started to get inspired. And he heard one episode where he was challenged by me to come up with a goal that was almost impossible. So with 2 broken legs, he decided that in a year and a half he was going to run a marathon. So all this was happening in 2010, and I didn't even know this was going on until he sent this to me 2 years later, because at the end of this email was a picture of him crossing the finish line of this marathon, 26.2 miles, earbuds in. He said he was listening to my podcast the whole time, and he's holding up this banner. And this banner is in Polish, so I don't know what it says, but he translates it for me. It says, "Thank you, God," "Thank you to his family," and then "Thank you, Pat Flynn." This is crazy, and the funny thing about this is I had considered giving up on my podcast because I just wasn't feeling like it was actually doing anything for me versus the blog and a lot of the other things I was doing. And this really drove me forward to understand that you don't even know who's on the other end right now. We don't know who's watching this video, who might be benefiting from it. I met Michal in London when I spoke at Chris Ducker's event, and he gifted me the banner that
cool.
he had, and so I have that in my home office. So he started a business in the financial industry in Poland, and he's now one of the top bloggers. He's had the top podcast in Poland, and he self-published a book that sold 45,000 copies, and he's made a ton of money.
Pat Flynn.
Thanks, bro.
Click that big red button. You know what to do, and you'll get all my latest videos. Do it, click it, and I love you. Peace out, dog.